Okay, so this is for Mike. I said I'd tell you important things that are different between what I found with the teensy kit and tutorial, and what made it work for me. This can also be used as a kind of like what a beginner doesn't know about teensy, because really I didn't know much about hardware. So this URL is great, and if you click Teensy Arduino and then tutorial, that's how I got started on teensy. At the time that I got started, I was actually at the Arduino 101 place, which I actually thought was the hardware hacking village. It took me only 2 days to discover the hardware hacking village, so not too bad. The tutorial and so on under teensy, it has you download 3 pieces of software. That was a piece of cake. So hooking up the teensy to my laptop was not a problem. The only thing missing from the kit, and I'll just show you what I got in my kit. Apparently it was slightly different for different people. It was all these parts and the teensy board here. But I got this breadboard from Fry's that night. I also did a couple other supplementary things. I picked up this USB cable because I didn't have one, and I couldn't find one in the vendor area, and some more jumper cables, an LED, and this ultra cool mercury tilt switch. So just to remind you, my project was that when big birds land on my hummingbird feeder, they would be heavy enough to tilt it, activate that switch, and then do something to scare the birds away. So I'll go back to the original kit. I'll talk first about going through the tutorial. There was only a couple things that were a little different. So the tutorial has you use a breadboard here, which I had to get at Fry's. So maybe next year the kit could have a breadboard included and not force you to solder. But hooking it up and there's a little light here in the tutorial, you get that to flash. That was a piece of cake, and changing the interval of the flash was also really easy too. The tutorial went on to get you to hook up one of the LEDs, and there were 4 in my kit in total. There were 2 red and 2 green. I just stuck them in the breadboard here to keep them orderly. The first thing about the tutorial is that it tells you in big capital letters that you need to put a resistor between your LED and your connections, or else you'll burn out your LED. Well, with these LEDs, that's not true, and because these are tiny, they don't have a part number, there's no way I could have found that out. On the other hand, this thing here, it has a part number on top of it. This is actually a speaker, so doing a Google search on that part number revealed all kinds of information about the speaker. This here is a light meter of some kind, and the tutorial tells you how to get output from your COM ports, and that actually worked pretty well, although it was intermittent. For example, COM4 got me some numbers appearing for these, but it was intermittent. All of a sudden COM4 disappeared from my Arduino software interface, so a reboot fixed that. I don't know why I lost my COM ports. This capacitor looked interesting, but again, I wasn't able to use it very well. So using the breadboard with the particular teensy that we got was a bit of a problem because there are no header pins. With header pins, we would get pins coming down from each side, and these plug directly into the breadboard. My first attempt at solving this issue of no header pins, since I didn't want to go back to Fry's, was, put a wire straight through here and through the breadboard. And what I was hoping was that there would be enough contact created. And then some kind stranger came along, and he pointed out that you can just twist the wire around so that even without header pins you can get your connection working pretty well. And sometimes this has to be jiggled, but it actually worked great for me. When you go through the tutorial then, with just the addition of a breadboard and the USB cable from Fry's, you can get it working pretty well. The other thing that I started experimenting with, and I still need to research a bit more, is that you can put a light here, you can put this LED, you can put the light meter, you can put the speaker, but this speaker actually only produced clicking sounds. And then I ran into Lost, and I was asking him about that. And apparently there's some magic numbers that you can send this to actually make it make a sound. And there are libraries and examples that you can get that working with. I'm going to talk to you a bit more about what Keith told me about these different parts that came that I didn't get to use, but I've covered what I did in the tutorials anyways, which are pretty good tutorials. This board is excellent because it's exactly the size of the teensy, and also it's double-sided, so there's metal on this side and that side, and the advantage of that is that when I'm using jumper wires, I can wire them up on either side, so I don't have as much mess with wires. This board, on the other hand, is single-sided, so take a look. There's metal on one side and not on the other side. So it's a bit more limited, but I imagine it doesn't cost as much. This one, Loss told me the secret of how to get this to work is you put your soldering iron on a very high temperature. Then you solder each point on each connection very quickly. So if you leave it at too low a temperature, you're going to be pressing for too long, and then the underlying, whatever this is, it's going to melt on you. Later on, after I talked to Loss, somewhere in the hardware hacking village, someone told me that they noticed that when this was kind of bent and used a lot, the copper would start flaking off. So I'd imagine that this would probably be best protected by some kind of hard box around it, so that after you do the initial solder, you just wrap it around your board, and then you make sure that you don't bend it a lot, or else the copper will flake off, basically. This one, I haven't figured out what to do with it yet, but obviously it's the same kind of idea as your bigger boards. So here you have actually both sides, and I guess you could put some tiny things on here if you want. I didn't get to soldering, so I'm looking forward to that whole thing. Here's something about these resistors. There are all kinds of different kinds of resistors, and you can do a Google search on resistor color code chart or something to that effect, and this will tell you the strength of each resistor. And what Lost told me is that each kit had different combinations so that you could actually trade amongst other people. Now, since I was in the Arduino 101 area, there was no one to trade with, but I think that's a pretty good idea. Another thing about these kits is that somebody I was talking to later said that you can get a whole bag of them of all different sizes for about 20 bucks on eBay. It's a lot cheaper doing it that way rather than going, say, to SparkFun or Make or something like that, because you end up paying a lot for shipping costs if you start ordering them individually. So just, you know, buy a big bag of assorted ones from China and just put that into your kit and so on. So what I'm doing with all this information that I learned, you know, once I got this working, and even more excitedly, once I got this Mercury tilt switch, is totally cool, because when I bend it, it completes the connection, and when I unbend it, it doesn't. That worked great, and I could get the LED working. So my idea is if I could only figure out how to get the speaker to do some really loud, scary sound to birds, I could build my hummingbird alarm, scare away the big bird alarms. After that, I did a little bit more thinking and figured out that I'll actually have a wind alarm on that hummingbird feeder, which isn't exactly the point, especially at night. So maybe I could use the light sensor and make it only work during daylight hours, and then only when it's tilted. But the thing is, in Phoenix, especially in August right now, we have things called monsoons, and it gets really windy. So I'm developing actually a different idea for the hummingbird feeder. In the meantime, I made a second trip to Fry's, and I'll just show you what I got there. This is actually a kit, and it's they call it a European siren. I don't know what's different about European and North American, but basically all of this in this soldering kit, it was $15, and I got a cheap soldering iron and, you know, other little parts that I could use. My plan now is to go away from the whole teensy thing, because a teensy costs $16. This whole thing is $15. This plus, I figure, the Mercury switch. If I could just add that in, so it's only activated when the hummingbird feeder tilts, I could still do my little tilt alarm and get some practice soldering. So that's where I'm at right now with the teensy. I still have a lot of questions, like how to get the light meter working, how to get the original speaker working. But in the meantime, this kit looked pretty fun because it has everything that I need to get started, at least to do a kind of a tilt alarm. And that's the end of my brain dump. Hope you have fun, and tell me what you're up to.